What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. SBMTG. We like magic, and I'm back in action, back on camera, so I can bring you the top 10 sleepers in core set. And yeah, I missed your face too. It's good to be back. But in any case, you guys know by now that whenever a new set comes out, I like to look at all the cards that are flying up under the radar, not being taken seriously enough. Maybe because there's some other cards that are taking up all of the hype, or maybe because you and I are the only ones that know how to play this game. Everybody else is crazy. Could be that. But, despite the fact that the response to core set has been pretty good so far. This is a set that a lot of people like. There are still, as usual, a bunch of cards that just aren't getting their due credit. So let's highlight those today. Now, to kick things off here and kind of ease our way into things, I want to briefly talk about some commons and uncommons here before I get to the main list, because I think there are plenty of cards of the lower rarity that people just aren't taking seriously enough either. Like Dryad Greenseeker. I tend to like creatures that say tap, draw a card, which this almost kind of does, so I want to pay some attention to it. Same thing with Mirror Image. Look at that ability. It just seems like this thing is bound to do something tricksy before its time in Standard is up. Actually, Blue has a few cards down here at Common and Uncommon that I think people need to take a second look at. Like Skilled Animator, it's a card people talked about the first day it was spoiled and then never again, but this card is awesome. It's really easy to have an artifact on turn 1 or turn 2 to turn into a 5/5 the turn you drop an animator. You've got a real threat on your hands relatively early in the game. Same thing with Departed Deckhand. This is another blue card I think we all need to take a second look at. It's only 2 mana for a 2/2. It's a bear with upside, more or less. It's a pirate, and that tribe needed a little bit of help. It's unblockable. That's nice. Plus, it's a mana sink that makes other creatures unblockable later on in the game for a little bit of reach, which is something the pirate deck really needed. And honestly, the whole if it becomes the target of a spell, sacrifice it, pretty much any spell they target it with is going to kill it anyway, so that line of text almost doesn't even exist. So I like a lot about Departed Deckhand, and it's just not getting any talk whatsoever. And finally, Stitcher's Supplier is still a sleeper, even though it did appear in the Professor's Top 5 Cards for Modern video. I still think people aren't taking this card seriously enough. 1 mana for a mill 3 and a chump blocker and another mill 3, it's just so good. Whether you're trying to get Tassiger out in Modern or something, or you're trying to play, like graveyard strategies in Standard, this is probably just better than Minister of Inquiries and a Godfarer's Gifts deck. So this thing is actually really flexible and has a lot of uses, and I don't know that enough people are seeing that yet. But now that that's out of the way, time to start the actual list at large with an honorable mention. First up to bat, Desecrated Tomb. You see what I did there, but in any case, I actually really like this card, a lot more than I should. I'm not really sure what we're supposed to do with it in Standard right now, but there are a bunch of ways to get a little bit of value out of it. Like Scrap Heap Scrounger, at first I thought it was only going to give you 1 bat, but a bunch of people pointed out to me in the comments section of the video where I said that, in fact, it gives you 2 bats. You remove the 2 creatures from your graveyard for Scrounger's ability, you get a bat. And then Scrounger leaves your graveyard, you get another bat. So that's actually pretty good value right there off just 1 card. Plus, I know I've already brought up this combo in the past, and I also know I'm not exactly the EDH guy around these parts, but I at least want to briefly reiterate that Tortured Existence exists, and it looks really funny with this card. You effectively get a bat for each black mana you can spend. And if we get a card like that in Standard at any point while Tomb is in the format, it could actually be pretty breakable. Any card where for a cheap amount of mana, or even for 0 mana, we can break up these triggers one by one and just get a bunch of bats. That seems really good. So be on the lookout for an effect like that, because if we do get one, Desecrated Tomb suddenly gets really good. But let's actually start the real list, finally. I don't know how far we are into the video, but thanks for sticking around. Number 10 is Sarkhan's Unsealing. Now this is the perfect can you imagine card. Can you imagine you have a Sarkhan's Unsealing in play, and then you curve into Yargle? Seems funny. Or you curve into Gigantosaur or something like that, All that seems great, but you don't even have to curve into a creature that gives you, the second paragraph of text on this card. Even if you just curve into a creature on your next turn that has 4 power or more, this is still good. Every creature that you play becomes a Necrotal type effect or a Ravenous Chupacabra type effect. Any creature you play can wipe a creature on the other side of the board, which might be worth taking off your turn 4 to do. You guys know that I don't really like do-nothing cards, like cards that don't do anything the turn they come into play, especially enchantments, because those can't even chump block if you need them to, So I have a problem with taking a turn off, especially turn 4, or turn 3 if you ramp it into play, to play an enchantment that really doesn't do anything until the next turn. You have to untap with it and play all that stuff. So I am a little bit wary about this card for all the reasons you're supposed to be, but I am still at heart one of those players that's like, can you imagine if you do this ridiculous thing? And Sarkhan's Unsealing has so many different scenarios where you can imagine something super busted happening. So if we actually get to, break this card, it's going to be super stupid. There's just so much potential with a card like Unsealing, and that's what being a sleeper is all about. We don't look at the floor, we look at the ceiling. Like, yeah, this card could be bad, but if the card gets to do any work at all, the ceiling is insanely high, and it makes the card kind of busted. The same thing is true of my number 9, by the way. Another card I don't think people are taking seriously enough, Isareth the Awakener. This is another card where the floor is relatively low. It's down there in the basement. You waste your third turn playing this. They lightning strike it. Whoops, you lost a bunch of tempo on that. But the ceiling is ridiculous, like Sistine Chapel high, because if you get one attack step in with this, it threatens to replace itself with an even better creature. And even if it doesn't replace itself with a better creature, you still got some value out of it. If they block it and kill it or whatever, it's got Death Touch. So unless the creature that it's that blocks it has first strike or indestructible, it's going to take something out with it and replace itself when it attacks. So all of that actually seems pretty good. Plus, it's in the right color to do some work too. You get this on turn 3, you attack turn 4, we can just start bringing back Gifted Aetherborns and Glintsleeve Siphoners that have already died. But if you get this as a top deck and you actually get to swing with it on the next turn, that's when you can start bringing back those Ravenous Chupacabras and Gaunties and creatures that get you real value. Altogether, I do have my doubts about Isareth, but again, just one swing makes it all worth it. So, is Isareth alright? It's alright. Now, my number 8 is a card that pretty much everyone just discounted the moment they saw it, but I actually think there might be something to it. Number 8 is Lina, Selfless Champion. The Gangsta Lean, this card just has so much potential, even in a Goblin Chain Whirler meta. I actually don't think it's terrible in a Chain Whirler meta because you're going to play it long after they play their first Chain Whirler. And if they want to play another Whirler after you play your Lina, sacrifice your Lina, protect all your tokens. Not actually too hard to envision. Plus, I like a card like this, even at 6 mana, because it's decent in Reanimator decks. Godfarer's Gift, Scarab God goes well with this. Even a card like Liliana Death's Majesty goes pretty good with this, because you're going to be repeating that into the battlefield trigger. Even if you only get a couple of tokens off of it, it's probably well worth it. Not to mention that, again, cards like Godfarer's Gift and the Scarab God bring this back even bigger than it's intended to be. Seems pretty good, honestly, Its ability to sacrifice and protect all your small guys is going to be great against things like Fumigate and, again, Goblin Chain Whirler. So I like a lot about this card, and even at 6 mana in a Chain Whirler meta, I think there are things about it to pay attention to. Now, my number 7 is Demon of Catastrophes. I am really surprised that no one's talking about this card right now. It just looks insane to me, especially considering there are plenty of ways in Standard to turn the downside around side, Cards like Doomed Dissenter will give you a 2/2 when it dies. Direfleet Hoarder will give you a treasure token when it dies. There's everyone's favorite Fox, a Filigree Familiar, draw a card and get a 6/6 for 4 mana. Doesn't seem bad at all. There's plenty of other stuff, Wretched Camel, they'll discard a card. There's just lots of stuff that you can abuse this sacrifice trigger with, Plus, I just feel like once it's out, it's way better than other 4 mana 6/6s that have some sort of onboard downside. So once you resolve the card, it's actually much better than a lot of cards like it. Now, my number 6 is a Planeswalker, but I had to do it. Number 6 is Vivi Reed, man. Just no one is talking about her. Everyone's like, oh, ho, hum, blah, blah. But actually, I think she's one of the better Planeswalkers in the set. I just had to put her on the sleepers list as opposed to the main top 20 list I'm going to do, because no one cares about Vivian Reed. And I think she's at least better than two of the other Planeswalkers in the set. Her first ability is card advantage with a dig, which is great, once you +1 or 2. She's a relatively high starting loyalty. All that's awesome. Plus, she's a green Planeswalker that can kill creatures. And there are lots and lots of flyers that people are playing in this format right now, you know? They play Glorybringer turn 5 and you're on the draw, just drop your Vivi and kill that Glorybringer. That's worth the mana, and you've still got your Planeswalker out. Plus, lots of artifacts and enchantments too, you know, play this on turn 5, bust up their Heart of Kieran or whatever else they're relying on. So, I think this just has so much play. Oh, and by the way, not to mention that it busts up, you know, cast outs, seal aways, Ixalan's Binding. The second ability on this is just absolutely nuts right now because it hits so many different things in so many different decks. And I understand that maybe people wanted a little bit more flash, a little flair from their Planeswalker. You know, people want their Planeswalker to be a little bit different, but I personally value good Planeswalkers. You know, they can do something different and still be good, don't get me wrong, but just on a stock level, this might not be the most exciting Planeswalker, but at least 2 of its 3 abilities, and even the ultimate to be honest, are really, really good in most games of Magic. And once you do get the ultimate off, by the way, it just makes attacking completely consequence-free. And you want that too. So there's a lot that I like about this Walker, and I'm just not sure why people don't care. But we're halfway up the list. My number 5 is Gore Claw, Terror of Kalsisma. I know there are a lot of like Commander players talking about this card, but I just don't see enough Standard players talking about this card. I really think we need to take this thing seriously because it's going to act like a mini monument. And by the way, it works really well alongside Aronis' monument. But even if you don't have a monument out, it's still going to make for these ridiculous turn 4s, you know, if you get this on turn 3, thanks to Lana Orel for Servant of the Conduit, whatever you're doing. It just allows you to play all the stuff on turn 4. Seriously, you can get up to 8 mana in value on turn 4 with a Gore Claw on turn 3. Not to mention that once you actually do get around to attacking with all the creatures that you're playing for cheap, she's got your back covered there, you know. She makes them all a little bit bigger, and she gives every single creature you're attacking with trample. There's just... yeah, man, this card's crazy to me. I know that it's a little bit susceptible to removal, and it follows the rules of, you know, is this creature good in Standard? No, because it doesn't do anything the turn it comes into play. Blah, blah. Like, I understand all the spiky ways you're supposed to evaluate a creature in Standard, but for this, I don't care. This is one of those that if you untap with it in play, it doesn't even necessarily have to attack to get you all the value in the world. You'll just fill your board with big fat dudes on the next turn. And that's exactly what you want to be doing. So I like a lot about this card, and I think it might actually be a real addition to Mono Green Stompy, especially post-rotation. Or, before I move on here, imagine it in like a green-red deck, where you play it on one turn, and then in subsequent turns it allows you huge discounts on like Rekindling Phoenixes and Glorybringers and Dragons and stuff like that. So this actually looks really good to me. I wouldn't ignore it. It's just, let me just say it's better than the average bear. Now, my number 4 is yet another 4-drop that I've got a lot more faith in than some people, and that's Leonin War Leader. First of all, love the creature type, you know I'm into that, but aside from that, if this thing attacks even once, it's ridiculous. You know, it's created 6 power for you. 2 of that power has lifelink for only 4 mana on 3 guys. That's just the best deal in the world. Any attacks past that point, and it's unbelievable. You know, a lot of these creatures like this would say, you know, exile the tokens at the end of combat or at the end of the turn or whatever. But no, you get to keep your kitty cats after this, you know. It's just, that seems decent. If they don't die in combat, you at least get a little extra value out of this. And even if your war leader dies in combat, you again still get a little bit of extra value out of it. That's great. And I know I've already mentioned this, but I still dream. I'm having actual dreams about curving this into a Regal Caracal. That just looks so disgustingly good to me. And if nothing else, we'll play it in the Green-White Cats deck. You know, that deck hasn't picked up all the pieces in the world, but it's nice that it picked up this particular piece, because it might end up helping the deck out an awful lot and make it actually worth playing again. You know, I want to break out those Pride Sovereigns and Regal Caracals and such again, and this might give us the perfect excuse to do just that. Now, my number 3 is Demanding Dragon. This was number 1 for a while, but I think too many people know how good it's going to be after rotation to really call it a sleeper in that way. But another definition of sleeper is a card that's literally asleep until rotation wakes it up. And I think that's what's going to happen with Demanding Dragon. If people actually try and make a dragon deck in Standard, a la Sarkhan and stuff, in the upcoming core set Standard format, then Demanding Dragon might have a slot in those decks, but for the most part, I think that Glorybringer is going to be the 5-drop dragon of choice for the next 3 months here. But once rotation does hit, I think Demanding Dragon takes its slot easily. You know, this is a card that's always going to generate some amount of value for you. when it enters the battlefield. 5 mana 5/5 flying is pretty decent stats just on its own, but it's got a really good into the battlefield trigger, and you guys know I like those. Against control, it's basically a lava axe when it resolves. If they don't have any creatures, they're going to take the 5. If they do have any creatures, they may have to sacrifice their Torrential Gearhulk unless they feel like they can race you, you know? And against mid-range and aggro decks, you're going to kill something. Sometimes it's just going to be a random token, but a whole lot of decks don't play random tokens because Goblin Chain Whirler is so important. So a lot of decks don't play, you know, smaller or, you know, 1 toughness creatures. So in a meta like that, the chances that this actually picks off a decent creature are relatively high. But moving on to number 2, I'm going to talk about another 5-drop dragon, believe it or not. That's Bone Dragon. Every time I look at this card, I think of Nightmare Before Christmas for some reason, like when he's walking back to his house and the guy that plays saxophone is like, "Nice work, Bone Daddy." Like, just every time I look at the card, that scene pops into my head. But in any case, that makes me fond of it. But aside from that, the card just looks good on its own. You know, again, a 5 mana, 5 power flyer, not the worst deal in the world, but if they can take it out with some form of removal, all it takes is some mana and some cards in your graveyard. You can bring your dragon right back, and I like recursible creatures as a general rule. Now, yeah, I've already said I don't like this one as much as I usually like recursible creatures. But again, you know, it only takes a few swings to end the game with this, and if you can just get it back one time out of your graveyard, I think it's done all the work that you want it to do. It's no Rekindling Phoenix, but if you're in a color that doesn't have access to Rekindling Phoenix, this is the next best thing. So I think Bone Dragon might actually have a real chance at being like a 1 or 2 of in certain decks, especially, again, decks that don't have access to quote-unquote better options, because it's still a pretty freaking good option. Now, my number 1 is probably going to surprise you, but number 1, by a mile as far as I'm concerned, is Thorn Lieutenant, because no one is taking this card seriously. If you go over to the main subreddit r/MagicTCG, it's mostly a bunch of people crapping all over this card, and a few enlightened ones who understand that this is a 2 mana 2/3 in standard that's easy to cast, brick walls aggro early, has a couple of particularly good plays against mono red, by the way, and if they try to lightning strike it or whatever, it gets you extra value, and in the late game, it's a huge mana sink that can block Hazarets and stuff, so, or just deal a bunch of damage by itself. There's just so many good things about this card. It's so many abilities packed onto a 2/3. And a 2 mana 2/3 is a good stat line in standard. You know, we play Winding Constrictor, we play Gifted Aetherborn, and even though those are different cards in this, you know, Winding Constrictor is a build around 2 mana 2/3, and Gifted Aetherborn probably brick walls aggro a little bit better than this does in the early game. I still think there's so much to love about this card. For instance, I'll go back to the mono red example. Let's say we're playing against mono red. They go turn 1 Bomac Courier, turn 2 we play our Thorn Lieutenant, and then when they go on turn 2 they play Earthshaker Kinra. Common play line for them, that's exactly what they want to be doing, is Courier into Kinra. Well, let's say they do that and we have our Lieutenant out. Well, the only creature they can target with Earthshaker Kinra's enter the battlefield trigger is Thorn Lieutenant, at which point we get a 1/1 that we can block Courier or Kinra with and still kill either one of those creatures. That's a really important playline that people just aren't talking about, and it definitely exists. You also need to bring up the way this plays against control right now, because aside from like Settle the Wreckage and Fumigate, you know, most control removal right now, whether it's blue-black or blue-white, is 1 for 1. So, you know, when they cast down your creature or when they seal away your creature, they expect that to be a 1 for 1, they're done. They don't have to interact with that creature anymore. But just leaving behind a 1/1 is actually pretty decent against control. That can be really pestering for them because they effectively have to use 2 removal spells in order to not take damage but from this creature. And I haven't even really dug into the activated ability yet. Again, if the game goes long, this is sort of Sylvan Advocate. You know, if you just draw a land on turn 6 or 7 and you want to do something with your mana, this is a heck of a thing to do with your mana. Suddenly you have a 6-power creature on board that is a really threatening attacker. So again, I just think that people are calling this card bad that are not quite seeing all of the different aspects of the card. So I just wanted to bring this card up for a minute and just really go ham talking about it because I see a lot of potential in this thing that to me is obvious. Like, I don't think you have to look too hard to see how good this card is, but apparently you do, so I'm going to make it number 1 on my sleepers list. But that's pretty much it. Let me know if I missed anything, but do remember that if I missed a card you think should be on the sleepers list, I might have liked it enough to put it on the main top 20 list, which is going to be the next video I do. So if you haven't subbed yet, make sure you sub, because you probably want to know what the top 20 cards in the set are, right? So sub, hit the bell for the notifications to make sure you get that video. And if you enjoyed this one, hope you hit the thumbs up button. Another way you can do me a solid is by checking out my sponsored TCG player by clicking the first link in the description down there. All the prices I use in this video are pre-order prices, current as of June 24th, and they all come from TCG player. They're all the lowest prices online right now for any of these cards. And since this is a sleeper list, these cards are likely to rise in price if they really do become a little bit better and people sort of start to see their potential after the set comes out. So some of these you might want to go ahead and jump on before they rise in price. Also, if you wanted the occasional witticism, or sometimes the exact opposite of a witticism, you can follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, or if you want to help out a little bit around here, you can throw me $1 on Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to help the channel out for that. But aside from that, pretty sure I'm tapped out, but it's your turn now. Take to the comments section. Let me know how you felt about all these, which cards are your favorite, and what cards that you think are sleepers did I miss. With, again, the caveat that if you really like a card and it didn't appear in this video, it might actually be in the main list. So stay tuned, subscribe if you're new, hit the bell, do all the YouTube stuff, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.